Welcome to Console Empires. Today, I'll be showing you how to solve a CAPTCHA. In this video, you'll learn how to beat the extreme AI with an Xbox controller. There's a number of ways you can cheese this, but I'm going to play a more or less normal strategy here. So the easiest method, of course, would just be to use cheats, but that won't unlock the achievement. And if you do just want the achievement and don't really care about beating it like the right way, a good method is just to pick a non-standard map, as the AI is way stronger on Arabia than it is on like Migration. It also doesn't really know how to deal well with meme strats, so if you could TC drop it, that works too. They've recently improved a lot of its behaviors though, so tower rushing isn't quite as strong as it used to be. The AI, it knows how to Vill rush your towers down and will wall in the bases of its own. Back in the day on the CD version, I used to build a bunch of stray houses between my base and the AI base, as it would prioritize forward buildings so heavily that you could pretty much just delay its attack as long as you needed by feeding it houses. Alright, so on Arabia, you almost always want to attack early, against real players and against the AI, so I'm more or less going to do a men-at-arms build for this match. The AI gets considerably stronger in the late game, so it's critical to get some early damage in. If you just let it boom uncontested, it's going to be way harder to finish off. Being a robot, it doesn't panic in the same way that a player would, meaning that while in a real match you can get a lot of value from just harassing without getting kills, that can actually be detrimental to you against the AI if focusing on the fight leads to you idling your own eco. Later in the game though, it becomes oddly easy to raid as it makes really dumb decisions about where to place resource camps. It will even try sending its villagers forward to build mining camps in your base or right beside a neutral resource where you've already placed a TC. So spamming Hussar in the late game can be super effective against it. The Extreme AI has pretty high APM though, and it can do advanced techniques like split micro now too, all while continuing to macro effectively. And in the Dark Age, it can be pretty annoying. It'll try to lame you, and it will even pull off a pretty solid drush where it can distract you with hit and run harassment. The lower level AIs are pretty dumb about walking under the TC, but Extreme does a decent job at pulling back to stay out of range. Another area where it's improved, it'll try to house wall and small wall, but depending on the map generation, sometimes it fails at this. It also knows that it can snipe your wall builders with its starting scout after reaching Feudal. So while the AI has improved a lot lately, and especially over prior versions of the game, its big weakness is that it's predictable. It likes to build up a big attack in late Feudal with a mixed army comp, and then tends to add in its unique unit later in the game. Another couple of weaknesses are that it will chase your units way further than a player would, and it almost always overcommits to making counter units. This means that you can lure it away from its base to raid from another position, and that it's quite weak against a planned tech switch. So the AI is roughly like 1,000 elo, and at that level a lot of players are going to be weak to these same strategies, so it's still good practice to play the AI that way. Where you can get into trouble though is by overfitting the curve. If you optimize your strategy too heavily while practicing against the AI, you can get burned facing a less predictable human player. Okay, so now that we know what the AI is good at and bad at, here's the game plan. I'm going to open up men-at-arms, make a few archers, and then switch back into melee units to counter its inevitable wave of skirmishers. Similar strategies are common against real players, like going scouts into skirms for example, but humans tend to not produce as heavily in Feudal as the AI does. It will invest a lot into food units, and that can delay your castle time, but it does depend on the match. It's not uncommon lately to see even high-level players making literally every Feudal Age unit, despite the general advice to avoid building an AI army. Alright, so typically for men-at-arms you go with 4 on wood, but the Celts have a wood chopping bonus, so I was trying to get away with 3, and it doesn't work. I end up without enough wood to make a mining camp and a second lumber camp when I want to, so I have to take the straggler trees a bit early and end up with just going for 2 men-at-arms rather than the traditional 3. So I don't always follow build orders super precisely, like how I've got an extra vill on berries here too, but I'm still going to be able to hit 500 food before Loom completes and be able to click up. I reached Feudal in this match at 9:57 on 20 villagers, so that means I had 17 seconds of idle TC, so not quite a whole villager. While that's obviously not a perfect start, it's more than good enough to get the job done here against the AI. If your build is much sloppier than that though, you're gonna start having some trouble, as it'll be pretty aggressive with drushing or scouts when it thinks it's ahead. And that'll be tough to deal with when you're already behind and making mistakes and now have to deal with being rushed at the same time. So, still looking for the enemy, and getting my barracks down here. Should have had it down earlier. With the men-at-arms build, the goal is that you get the barracks up and start producing in Dark Age. So here's what's going on with the straggler tree there, where after I flopped the barracks, I didn't have enough wood for anything else and didn't want us to delay it further and mess up the timing even more. But I have found the enemy now, and you see the carpets there on the ground. That's on Arabia. You can like keep an eye out for those to help you not waypoint into the TC. And it looks like he's going for barracks too. Against a real player, sometimes you could tell by the timing, because once you've played enough matches to have a accurate elo, your opponent is pretty much gonna be playing at the same speed as you. So if you're on the way up and you see that their barracks is already up, then it's more likely that they're gonna go for Drusher Men-at-Arms against you, where what we saw just now, the foundation going up when we're most of the way up to the Feudal Age, means it's more likely that a real player would be going for straight archers or scouts. So you'd want to be looking around their base trying to find that. So scouting in general, I kind of do waypoint too much, and it's more efficient to at least keep it moving at all with the waypoints as opposed to leaving it idle for long periods of time. But like, it is something I need to keep practicing more, as you know, the only way to get better at it is to just force myself to waypoint less, even if that causes like a loss or like worse performance in those games. That then that's the only way to learn, is just keep doing it wrong until you get it right. But so I'm getting my walls up here and had got a couple militia queued out. I'm just on the 2, and ideally you've got them all produced and on the way over to the enemy base. So as soon as you hit feudal, you just hit the upgrade and attack straight away. But I'm just gonna have the 2 here, and we'll see if it still goes all right. All right, so got the walls coming up, got the range, got the blacksmith going down, and I almost make a second farm right here before getting housed, which would have been awful to then just have to stay housed without the wood to even make a new one. And well, that's, hey, it's time to get town watch. All right, so I got the men-at-arms out here, and I'm gonna add them to a control group because I didn't get the automatic grouping set up. I've got the militia switching them to defensive stance, which makes it less likely that if you stop looking at them, that they'll kill themselves in the TC. With defensive stance, what they do is if you click on a unit, that'll override it and they'll follow it. But if you just like let it stand there and do its thing, or if you attack, move, or patrol, it will follow, it'll chase just for like a few tiles, like a little bit more than its line of sight, and then go back automatically to where it started. So if you're attacking further out resource points, like a wood line or something, if you're on defensive stance and just go for patrol, they won't actually wander far enough to get killed under the TC. The archer range that quickly just popped up there was adding the archers. They're going to queue right into a control group now as soon as they produce out of the range. If you want to see that slower, the new 15 more tips shows that, or also the how to take down a castle art of war video. All right, so the enemy here, this is another kind of quirk of the AI. It leans into its civ identity strengths to a fault that I haven't actually even gotten there with archers yet, but it's already making skirms because the Byzantines get cheap trash units. So that can be, sometimes players even will commit more to trash than they normally would with Byzantines. But here, it just doesn't make any sense to make skirmishers into men-at-arms, which are the only units that they've seen so far, as men-at-arms demolish skirmishers. It's like the worst unit that they could be choosing to make right now. So I'm going to go even heavier into infantry to take advantage of that. This lumber camp, man. So we're seeing the consequences of my reliance on waypointing, because I waypointed flags in that area like 3 times and then canceled them, and then can't place the camp where I want to now. So if you add your production buildings to control groups, either all the same type or a subset based on like map position, you can then just tap LB to cycle between your groups, and if you have your Y shortcut set up for what you want to be producing at each one, then it's really fast to LBY, just spam that back and forth to keep producing your units without having to think about it or look away from what you're doing. But on the flip side, I accidentally split all the time trying to do that. And I'm just waiting for the accidental, like, perfect moment to happen where I'm just thinking I'm queuing units and I'm just dodging mango shots left and right off camera. I can dream. But yeah, so super late on the double bid axe here. Typically, you get the wood upgrades. You prioritize those right when you age up. Just you get the Feudal Age building down to start making some military, and then bid axe like right away. So this, with the mill, the farming on the site menu, I'm not sure if it's a bug or they meant to nerf it, But it used to, when you would do that, after you filled up a ring around the mill, it would start putting your farms around other buildings too, like other mills or your town center. And now it'll just keep stacking more concentric rings around that one mill. So it's a whole lot weaker than it used to be. And if you site menu on the TC, there's not an option to farm around it like that either. And I don't think it would be a balance reason, because it's not like you could say the site menu thing was like OP, that it can place the farms so fast, as auto eco can do it just as well, and that's completely automatic, where with the site menu you're still having to take an action to trigger the farm placement. Alright, so since I started working on this, the latest hotfix came out, and this behavior is actually even worse now, that you can't do the site menu trick at the moment at all. That the button is still there in the wheel, but it's grayed out. So hopefully we just get a fix on that one soon that reverts it back to its original behavior. Or at least if it was, maybe I could see the compromise of having it only work around the targeted building, but then the TC should have the same functionality where you can more quickly farm with it in the same way as you can with the mill. Lately, in some games when it was still working, I was actually building a bunch of extra mills to be able to quickly trigger the farming around each of them. The last match, actually, where I did that when the behavior was still working but limited to the mill, was actually a cross-input match, and I'm sure that my opponent was thinking, like, what is this guy doing? Why does he have 5 forward mills? Because in that match, I had a castle in the middle of the map, like, between our bases, and had originally walled off a really compact base in Feudal, so I just decided to farm around my castles and had, like, most of my farming eco forward in the center of the map. I probably could have walled over to that second little bit of trees over there, and I've had a hole at the front beside my wood there forever. But luckily so far he hasn't tried to push in through it. Or, the big gaping unfinished area of the wall on the right edge. Skirmishers can't really push in and do a ton of damage. I mean, sometimes they can, and he's got a lot of them, so they could definitely be annoying if he had walked into my base with those. Which is another difference with how a real player would likely have come up with a counterattack to get into my base by now. And so the archers here, I've had them on stand ground, as opposed to the men-at-arms I left on defensive, where it's useful to just have the archers stay put, that you can send them to a resource point and just kind of leave them there. And then when you get the attack horn, flip back and do whatever you need to do to try to survive or win the fight. Because while they're just standing there when you're not looking, you're still getting value out of denying that resource from the enemy. So sometimes even if you put just a couple on gold and a couple on wood and a couple on the berries, then you're forcing the enemy to think about multiple spots, and they have a more difficult challenge to defend from that, where once you've got the archers ordered to go there, just let them sit. But check out that house wall though, that's pretty nice. It didn't used to do that. That's +1 for the AI there. It of course didn't finish the wall, which is kind of the most important part. It's all right, it's learning. It's not Skynet yet. But I am getting some pretty good damage in, despite how I've made and lost kind of a lot of units that at this point it's 22 minutes in and haven't clicked up yet. So you gotta kind of be careful going as all in with Feudal to make sure that you're really doing damage to justify it. As the harder that you commit into producing units and getting upgrades in Feudal, you're putting pressure on yourself that you have to do enough damage to justify that. Otherwise, you're just putting yourself behind. You're going to get to castle later, and they'll make 3 knights and clean up everything that you've got. All right, so he does get up ahead of me, despite all that. And I even have my Castle Age upgrade queued behind 2 villagers and am housed. So that's not ideal. But we still got this group of archers out trying to get some more harassment in, at least force him off gold, prevent him from making those 3 knights. So don't worry if you're making some mistakes, because this game's hard, and if your goal is just to get the extreme AI achievement, or if you're playing against it for practice for ranked matches, either way, you don't have to stress out about trying to play perfectly perfect. Everyone, even pro players, even the robot itself, it makes less than ideal decisions, makes mistakes, and freaking out about every little mistake you can't just let it ruin the game for you. Which can be pretty hard to do given the design of this game, that it's always overwhelming, that you've got too much to do pretty much all the time, and the better you get at those things, the more you realize also that you could be doing. But that's what makes it fun, right? And that's why this game has survived for so many years now, is that there's always so much to learn. Like, no matter how much you think you know about it, there's always something you could be doing better. And everyone is constantly always making mistakes in it, even if it feels stressful to you. Remember that your opponent at the same elo is going to be messing up just as much as you are. So they fixed control groups, overwriting and merging, which is awesome. But when you're producing into groups, that won't overwrite. That's why I flipped the production to one group and then back to the one that I had it on. All right, so to put a bow on my tangent about mindset and making mistakes, what I'm getting at is that as far as playing without being stressed out about it, that maybe a hot take, but I think almost everyone worries too much about like playing the meta. And if you're not super high, like top 5% PC, that it like really doesn't matter, that there's no such thing as a civ loss in the sense that the flow of the game and the randomness of the mistakes that you and your opponent are going to make is going to far outweigh and create opportunities and disadvantages to a much greater extent than any balance issue or strategic decision as far as doing like a perfect build order. All right, so almost up to Castle Age, and the AI's got a bit of a score lead on me now, but I'm continuing to produce infantry and archers, which double gold is not always the best thing to do, but still getting lots of value out of these. Like the archers, just camped out around those resource areas are still denying those, not letting the AI collect them as many or as easily as it would like to. And so I've got no wood here. That having like one of the few times that you really do actually want to float a bunch of wood is on the way up to castle, so that you could drop your TCs as soon as you get up. But I am instead going for all the infantry upgrades, getting gambesons, and finally plugging in the hole there with a house, and have plenty of pop space now. So not about to get pop capped again anytime soon. But got the wood upgrade right as soon as we get up, so that's something good. And still, kind of lurking around with these leftover archers that I don't think I even bother getting crossbow for. Maybe I should have, because there's still 9 of them alive, I guess, if we look at my control group up there. But I've, at this point, committed to the longsword switch, and I think because of that, decided to forego the crossbow upgrade for now. Don't have the resources for heavy plow, trying to tidy up those farms. I was, thinking like, oh, I'm reseeding these. I should get the upgrade that makes your farms better when they reseed. So I'll just continue to abuse the market instead of learning how to balance my economy, because that's how you play this game. When you are in feudal, placing a bunch of farms as quickly as you can, it then kind of creates a cascade where they're all then going to expire pretty quickly around the same time. So you've got a big wave of farm expiration. So getting the upgrade in before that next big round of reseeding can make a difference. And I was wondering if I would realize the overchop here, and gonna put some more houses in there, and am now losing a bunch of archers. We've seen 2 now back-to-back fights where the skirmisher mass is doing its thing and picking off the archers. But remember, those are kind of throwaways at this point, that obviously they're still alive and I want to try to get what value I can out of them, but not getting crossbow and committing to longsword. So that's all still working out. So I don't know if you've noticed so far when I've been using the find menu here that it kind of stays up and I have to press it twice. I don't know if you guys have that problem too. That before, when you would do it and go to the blacksmith, for example, you release the buttons and it would immediately show the blacksmith wheel. Where now I have to tap them again to make the find wheel go away and then show the wheel that I wanted. Which I think there is a setting for that if you want your menus to be to hold or to tap, and I'm pretty sure that I set it to be on hold. So I don't know, I'll have to go back and double check that. But what were those rams doing over there? So that's, a player is often, if they're gonna go for rams, will build the siege workshop a lot closer to your base, rather than having to move and if they're gonna move rams from further back to be sneaky or whatever, maybe they didn't have map control to put the forward siege workshop, are going to garrison some infantry pikes usually in them to make them move faster. So where are all these guys going? This is a kind of weird thing that the AI will do, that it'll harvest resources from anywhere, like outside of its walls, inside of your base. Like it doesn't care. It's just gonna take what it wants. But so it does weirdly have a forward siege workshop, even though those rams were coming from somewhere further back in its base earlier. So I'm gonna try to get this castle up to kind of block that, because the AI, when it gets like a ram push going, it can actually be like really kind of surprisingly strong with it. That players, especially in Castle Age, don't really like rams that much, but the way that the AI will push with them can actually be pretty hard to stop once it gets kind of like a slow like steamroll into your base, that it makes enough of them and has enough units supporting that you can't just like Veil Rush the rams. So yeah, players usually will not focus on siege in Castle Age that much and just mostly wait for imp and get trebs, unless maybe you have like a siege bonus. But even then, getting like siege ram or siege honor is so much stronger than the Castle Age versions. You do see mangonels a decent amount, especially against archers. But anyway, my point is that we might be sleeping on rams a little bit, especially if you're like an average level player, because the way that the AI uses rams, it really can be surprisingly effective. And I think mixing in some rams in Castle Age at 1000 elo might actually be worth trying out more. Sometimes players don't do things that could work because it's scary to try something that is off meta. But then all of a sudden, when a pro uses whatever that random thing is to great effect in a tournament, it's all of a sudden like, how is this thing so OP? It needs to be nerfed, when, you know, like a week ago, like literally no one was playing it, and players were even saying this thing is trash, no one uses it, it needs to be buffed. With the last Red Bull event, the same thing happened, what I'm talking about with Steppe Lancers, where they had for a while been thought of as useless, especially the elite upgrade, until we saw how sick they could be, and now they're cool again. But lately, the only time that I've ended up making rams is when I forget that that's the default button when you press Y on the Siege Workshop, and think that I'm making mangonels when a few stray rams get mixed in because I forgot to change the shortcut. I kind of wish that there was a toggle for that in the preferences, that once you've changed the Y shortcut for a building type, that then future buildings inherit that. So, like, say you set your first Siege Workshop to make mangonels, then you build like 3 more. Those would then have Y create mangonels also, instead of having to each time you build one, select that and change the Y. You're like, oh, look at that! That was a massive mangonel shot. Man, I wish I could take credit for it. It's even, you know, off camera, obviously not a sick attack ground, but like, oh, that was brutal. That pile of red skirmishers there on the ground. So yeah, I mean, a player would kind of sometimes even just GG after losing their whole army to a shot like that. But yeah, this game is like pretty much over at this point. But the AI, it really doesn't like to resign. It'll hang on and keep fighting to a much greater extent than most players will. And some people like that, especially even some players that prefer to play against the AI, even, you know, go on Reddit and complain that like the AI still resigns too early, and they want the satisfaction of going in and flattening its base. So if you focus down its town centers, castles, and weirdly monasteries, that seems to be the trigger for getting it to actually give up. That if you're just raiding and raiding and raiding, but not actually taking down any of those key buildings, it'll pretty much just keep fighting. So I probably could have ended the game a little sooner here by pressuring the TC more directly. But why I didn't here was actually just with the longswords. I didn't want to shoot my own units with the mangonel and, you know, flatten my whole army inadvertently, which if you just click everything onto the TC, that's what's going to happen. And similarly, generally you don't want to click buildings in most situations, because the units then will prioritize that building even if they're getting attacked. Where if you just like patrol them in, they'll fight the building until there's units to fight, and then they'll fight the units. So I guess maybe this would have been an opportunity to make some rams on purpose. But so it's even gonna go up to Imperial Age here, which is like what I was describing at the start, that in this situation where it's getting completely overrun and it decides to spend 1,000 food on imp rather than continuing to make units to fight back is not the best decision. And the units that it is making, it's trickling out of that siege workshop that is getting mowed down. It just produced a ram. So it still has a little bit of that kind of fixation behavior where it's really doesn't like that I have a castle in the middle of the map and it's trying to trickle rams in after it. And if you really need to press a castle like that in Castle Age, you want at least 5 rams, not one at a time. And so if you're defending from a castle like this, you can also just go around, because my base is not really that secure. Like there's holes in my walls, I don't have castles at home, and there's not really any pressing reason why you need to destroy a castle in the middle of the map like I've got here. Well, yes, it is securing the area between our bases and covering some gold. It is downhill and it's not causing any immediate threat. Like it's not ranging his TC or anything like that. So there's tons of damage that could be done raiding my base and just ignoring the castle, acting like it's not even there. And it was pretty surprising this match that the AI didn't play more aggressively, that when it's ahead of you, it is a lot more, keeps the pressure on with raiding and raiding. This game feels snowbally a lot of the times anyway, and the AI's behavior kind of seems to play into that if it is ahead of you, it will push more aggressively, and if it's behind, it wants to like boom up to a point where it feels like it's caught up before pressuring you, which is kind of maybe counterintuitively not often going to work, because think if you've taken more damage than your opponent, that you both have the same capacity to make TCs and produce villagers, that they're going to win the race because they're already ahead, unless your boom is just that much better than theirs, which at the same elo that's not likely. And woohoo, look at that 1200 wood in the bank. So I should play Saracens more because I love the market. And the 1k floating stone here also was somewhat intentional this match, that I didn't want to do like a super aggressive early castle drop kind of strategy, as what I was going for is more showing how to beat extreme AI with the controller with a normal strategy that you could apply to an actual match. But I am deciding, at least at this point, to make some siege workshops that if I've got all this wood, I should be taking, better advantage of my civ strengths with Celts, right? Especially that you think at some point, 45 minutes in, I might go to Imperial Age and get Furor Celtica. But the wood bonus, it gets a lot stronger. Obviously, it's a percentage, right? So that when you have more lumberjacks and that they've got upgrades, that then the 15% of that bigger value is going to be even more. So with Celts, it can be a little bit trickier to not be floating wood as you get later on into the game. So, making more farms, making more siege units, whatever change that you want to make to your eco to capitalize on that bonus rather than just letting it pile up. And at this point, I am just going to go ahead and drop the forward castle. It's not like it's making a difference at this point. Like, this game is already over. I should be dropping forward outposts. But hey, that castle is not an aggressive castle. I just needed the pop space. So it's a good idea, though, that once you get into Castle Age, to just have a villager or two that are just, that's their job, is just to build houses. Like, you can even put them on a control group, and until you get enough capacity for 200, just have them just focus on being your house builders. So I think when we take down this last TC here, it should finally resign. I did eventually decide to, well, no, I didn't decide. It was the timing. Look at it. It's after getting the additional siege workshops up that I was just spamming Y on them and getting some rams. But yeah, should definitely have more farms at this point in the game, because I would want to be getting to Imperial Age sooner and have been floating all this wood, and it still isn't GGing after losing the TC there. Maybe when the castle goes up? And Town Watch, it's a good thing I'm getting that now. That's the make or break in this game. There it is. I accidentally resigned by mistake. No wonder thou art victorious. I love that it says that before it resigns. Like, guys, I'm about to make a mistake. Somebody stop me. Please help. I'm gonna resign. I can't help it. All right, so that's how you beat Extreme AI on an Xbox controller. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next week.